and welcome back to another installment of Working Class Revolt. I'm here with me always with my good comrade and weekly co-host, Australian labor organizer, David Fox. How are you tonight?
Right. Very good, very good. And a massive hello to all the Australian comrades out there as well. And also to anyone overseas, we're all in this to struggle together.
Right on, man. And we're very honored today to have with us Venezuelan embassy protector, author, activist, Al Suarez. How are you today, brother?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Right on, man. I know it was a little bit last minute, man. You called a little bit before. We didn't have nobody, man. You came in just in time, and we're honored to have you here. So we'll get right into it. Hopefully people can get in the chat. Please share this out. Share this on the Facebook. Share it on the Twitter. Get in the comments. We'll try to give you a shout out. We'll jump right into the events. Shout out. There we go. Shout out to Darth Buddha. Hello. Let's see. Maybe what's maybe you want to give us a labor update. How are things out there in Australia?
No worries. Well, first of all, there's important action that's going to be happening on Friday, the 22nd, at Smeaton Range in Sydney. Now, it's Coles. It's at Coles Distribution Centre, and obviously the workers out there have been locked out over the Christmas break. They've been for over 3 months now. Been locked out. The whole history behind that, they were in negotiations with Coles to vote up some proper good union conditions. Coles offered a non-union EBA, which was unanimously voted down, and they sort of take the union members there, members of the United Workers Union, took protected action or industrial action, and then Coles decided to lock them out over the Christmas break. Now, there's over 350 families that are affected by this directly. It's obviously a very big distribution centre. For those of you overseas wondering what Coles is, they're part of the Coles Myer Group, the big supermarket chain we have here in Australia. It's a duopoly with Woolworths. They play havoc on farmers, but also on their workers as well, both in the supermarkets, distribution centres, and transport logistics. Obviously, the action is going to be happening. It's organised by the May 1st movement. Now, it is an event on Facebook, or an events page has been set up by the May 1st movement on Facebook. For those of you in Sydney, I encourage all the comrades and friends and other workers there to be down there on Friday 22nd in solidarity. Support the workers, as much solidarity as possible. I believe there's been a lot of fundraising for those for the workers and their immediate families as well. But all you really need to do is just type in May the 1st movement. And that'll bring you up to them, and then just click on them, and it'll take you to the events page to grab those further details. Another information as well, I spoke about it briefly yesterday. James Strong cans. They're a big, they're a multinational tin can food can manufacturer. They announced, I received a call not last week before. While they're looking to not close down, but make a lot more redundancies. So basically, they only have a really tiny skeleton crew left. That's going to be devastating for a little town called Kyabram, which is north of here, sort of northeast of here. It's about over an hour away. But Kyabram itself is probably like to have about 2,000 people living in it. But that's a major setback for them. The reasons behind that redundancy, they've lost a lot of work because of this ongoing Australia-China trade conflict. A lot of China's now reviewing a lot of the free trade agreements, that a lot of the stuff is bringing back in-house and manufacturing. I'm not too sure it's going to affect the other James Strong plants in Australia, but obviously this is going to be devastating on a small town, especially for those workers. And at this time during the height of COVID-19, to be made redundant. Now, the other thing behind that as well, this is also coming to show that things will get worse for us here in Australia. I'll be burning back to work at the end of this month. I'll be certainly up that site, following up from there. But it wasn't exactly the greatest news to start off in 2021. It hasn't really started off on a great start for anyone around the world. That's a very important thing. So they're just two of it. Because I've been on holiday, it's only just being touched on it. But yeah, it's not exactly when I was in self-isolation, I get a call first thing in the morning. Oh, by the way, I've got to just let you know. And I think, oh, great. It's not the fantastic news to receive that. Obviously, this is like I've said. I don't want to sound like a scratch record, but this is devastating for a small community like Kyabram as well. For anything like that, you guys have seen into what's happened in the US when plants just shut down and old towns get decimated, and the social issues that come from that. It's working class people who always suffer, not shareholders and the board of directors. The other thing on that too, just for those of you who are a little bit unfamiliar with James Strong, they make obviously food cans for the food industry. This particular plant made food cans for powdered milk and milk products and baby formula, etc. But obviously now this escalating trade war has not helped the situation at all. And like it's correctly pointed out, it's working class people that suffer from this, not bosses.
Wow, that's kind of depressing, but we got to know what's going on. We got to know how to respond to it. So I'll let you go. I'm out here in North Carolina. I'm actually switching jobs from a smaller local company to a larger local company. I'm on a 4-day weekend in between jobs right now. I can actually say I'm in between jobs, but it's only 4 days. A lot of people permanently in between jobs right now. Not getting a lot of help. And yeah, damn health insurance in the United States is horrible. I was paying maybe a third or more, like more than 30%, just going to get the health insurance at a small company. I ain't even talking about, paying anything at the hospital or the co-pays or surgeries and any shit like that, or the out-of-pocket costs. That was just to get the health insurance was 30% of my income. I mean, it's ridiculous. Highway robbery. How things are going. I think this whole COVID crash has happened extremely unequally. People who, like, let's say middle class people who are maybe working class people that were able to keep their jobs, like myself, we're able to save up a little bit of money, and we were able to take advantage of not to the extent of these really rich people. But, people who have it decent were able to save those checks and continue working, and they weren't able to spend because they're not able to go out. So a lot of people have some pent-up money and demand. But then if you go look at the lower strata, the proletarian section of the working class, get away from the labor aristocracy, you go to the proletarian section, and that's the industry, that's the jobs that have been lost. This is entertainment. This is fast food. These are these precarious jobs that the lower section of the proletarian working class in the U.S. have been devastated and destroyed, and they're less likely to have accountants and shit to get their money from the government. I mean, there's issue with people not being married and not getting their stimulus. I mean, it's horrible for really working class people. Proletariat. It's let me
Where's the $2,000 that were promised, right, by Biden?
We'll get in the news. Oh, you go ahead, man. Alex Suarez, maybe you can give us. You're out there in Florida, no?
Yeah, Alex Suarez here, and that's what I gotta ask now. I'm up here in Northeast Florida, and where's the $2,000 checks that the Democrats promised us, right? Now they're talking about lowering the amount. This is what the bourgeois do. I have another question though. Where's David's hat? He was wearing a hat earlier.
No, I'll just put it on. Entertain everyone. There you go.
There you go.
All right, man. Alex Suarez. That we're going through labor updates. Maybe you can give us a little more of your situation.
Yeah, I'm a working class student, and I'm trying to pass something in the student government whenever they convene again, because there's a policy at my campus that's very classist. I go to University in North Florida, And unlike most colleges, they have a thing called gray zone parking and red zone parking, right? So the bourgeois students that can afford it, they get the red zone parking, right? So they get the parking that's very close to where most of the classes are. And us working class, we can only afford the gray zone, which is about $50 a semester. And we have to walk much farther to get the class. And a lot of times we have several textbooks they make us buy in our backpacks while we walk that long distance. And a lot of us are in not great of shape. A lot of times it rains. We don't have time necessarily for rushing to class to grab an umbrella or a jacket. It rains a lot here in Florida. So this is an example of classism. And a way to solve it is changing policy. You could change policy for the college through student government. Unfortunately, a lot of times, and I've been a student government in the past, people that join it are there for opportunistic reasons. They're not there to make a difference or to help uplift low-income or working class students. But yeah, this is an example of classism that we face every day, forcing us where to park on campus.
Right on, man. Shit, man. You bring me back to my college days, man. I lived on campus, and shit. I lived in the dorm rooms. I think they had like the suites, for people that had a little bit more money. They would have their own room with their bathroom, and they share like a kitchen with folks. And then they had the standard dorm rooms, and the dorm rooms were a little bit further away. And I would roll out of bed 5 minutes before class, my fat ass hop on my bicycle, and I would run in. I'd like almost mow people over, running through the crowds with my bicycle.
Using a scooter to get to a long time. That's what those working class people do. I remember how pissed off I was when I heard about Venezuela, that Leopoldo Lopez, who was one of the main terrorists, one of the main extremists, he's part of Voluntad Popular, the Popular Will Party as Guaido. He was responsible for these metal wires being put across these working class Chavistas neighborhoods, or predominantly Chavista neighborhoods, in order to intentionally behead, which they accomplished in several cases, people driving through on their scooters. They don't see the wire and they get beheaded. And then Lopez is eventually led to his mansion, house arrest. And now he's traveling in Europe, the United States, all over the place. He was able to escape and get out of the Spanish embassy in Caracas. And, this is the impunity of the terrorists that we're seeing in Latin America, and then a lot of people are throwing around the word terrorist now against working class people. For example, that stormed the Capitol. I don't support that action at all. But at the same time, I understand the desperation of the working class. What happened in Venezuela is you had terrorists by the bourgeoisie, by rich, spoiled brats who didn't get their way, and they set these traps to behead working class people in these neighborhoods.
Hey, Al, we're going into the news section. We just finished up with the labor updates. Maybe you, since we haven't had you on here and everybody's still talking about this riot, that's what I'm choosing to call it, a riot. Some people are calling it a coup. Maybe you can give us your take, your quick take on the events that happened. I don't know if it was last Wednesday or the Wednesday before last on the 6th.
We're a creditized nation in debt. You want to get educated in this country, unlike many countries throughout the world. You have to go in debt, and a lot of people are living on credit cards. They're not getting the help they needed. As I mentioned earlier, the $2,000 checks haven't been sent yet. And as a result of this desperation, much like the desperation we felt in the summer, I was tear gas in the summer, protesting alongside my brothers and sisters at BLM. So yeah, there is a desperation on both the right and the left, especially among the working and the poor in the country. And this desperation culminated in what happened at the Capitol. It has to be put in that context. It was a riot. It was an attempted coup. It's not something I would ever condone. At the same time, again, I can understand why there are certain individuals that are easily manipulated. And as a result of this desperation, they took drastic measures like that at the provocation of Trump.
All right. Here's a message from Keaton Mansfield, and he's part of the Party of Communist USA, and they wrote an interesting article, the beer belly push. And I don't really know much about that, but my initial reaction to that specifically was I don't like when you associate Trump with Hitler, and there's a lot of parallels. Some of that can be alarmist, and some of that can be Trump's so bad you should work with the Democrats, which I'm.
You said bully push. It sounds something happened at a frat house, but yeah.
No, it was. I believe it was a historical event that was like it was kind of like
you mean the push, like the coup in Germany? I know.
Oh yeah. Hey, was that a joke, Mr. Mansfield? Oh my God!
I don't know if he was telling. I was telling.
Shit, I didn't read that right, man. I thought he was actually being serious about that article. It looks like that's a joke.
I wonder where that conversation.
He's right about it, though. Yeah. He's right. I think that's a funny joke, though. Yeah. But I was being more seriously that there was a failed coup attempt in Nazi Germany.
And people were associated. The history of, because I'm a student of history as well. We'll talk about classism and history of beer. Indian Pale Ale was the cheap beer, the IPAs that the British gave the Indians. They drank their gin and tonics to prevent malaria. So they had their fancy gin and tonics, their Bombay drinks or whatever, and they gave the Indian Pale Ale to the Indians. They gave them the poor cheap beer. So even the IPAs, their history comes from classism. From the British colonialism in India.
Holy crap, man! This is pretty cool, man. I'm gonna remember that. I love me some.
That's why they call it Indian Pale Ale. It's not for Native Americans. It's from India.
Shit, like I knew Indian Pale Ale was imperial. Some people call it Indian Pale. Some people call it Imperial Pale Ale or whatever.
That would make sense, yeah.
Well, that's crazy, man. That's a good little bit of a joke here. Oh, no, you too young, man. I'm gonna put. Okay. Keaton.
IPA is good.
It's an acquired taste. It's kind of like Mexican candy, It's like you put your mouth, it's spicy, it got fruity, it's salty. It's like, oh my God, throw that out. How I got hooked on Mexican candy was. I was really broke, and I was hanging out with my friend, and that would be the only candy around. So I'd wash it off. I'd wash off all the spicy shit, and then I'd eat it. And sometimes I wouldn't wash it very good. And then slowly I got a tolerance for it, and now I love Mexican candy. It's the same thing with IPAs. Start with like a Sweetwater. Okay, never mind. Start with something and eventually you'll you work your way to double IPAs. Okay.
There's IPAs with CBD in it now, right? Like they're going all out on this stuff.
Okay. This is
a little fact. There's a little fact before we move on. In the UK, say like a few hundred years ago, when they had like bubonic plague, and when people were dying from drinking the water out of the Thames and stuff, but the workers in the brewery would actually they supplemented water with beer because they knew it had to be clean and pure, and they found out the brewery workers were living okay. They weren't continental because, and that's what they supplemented their drink instead. But unfortunately, though, you get too much of it, you wind up dehydrating. But at the end of the day, that's what they did. They drank beer instead of water.
Well, David, tell me if I'm wrong though, because you come from that background. But I studied some of the history. I heard that in Britain and Germany, the reason why they have such good beer is because they didn't import yet the spices from India in their food. So because their food didn't taste, they replaced it by drinking beer as well.
Yeah, that's correct. Yep.
All right, man. This is a communist work meeting, guys. I don't know where the hell this shit.
Well, we're talking about classes. Yeah.
All right, we gotta tighten this up, man. All right. We're gonna move on to another news section. I talked about this on my live yesterday. I'm gonna talk about the stimulus bill. Here's some from the Wall Street Journal. Biden pushes for 1.9 trillion pandemic economic relief, and what I've noticed, what Biden is pushing for is weak, and this hasn't even gone through the negotiation yet. When Biden was running for office, he said there would be $10,000 student loan forgiveness. He said he didn't have universal health care, had his own health care plan. He made a lot of promises that he is not keeping now that he's elected. And this is just the beginning of it with this so-called economic relief. A lot of the bailout is obviously going to go just like it did during the CARES Act. It's going to go straight to the rich. Only a one-time $1,400 check, and that probably is going to get away with. He did put in there raising the minimum wage, but you got to remember he hasn't even got to the negotiating table. This is his high offer. This is like when you go to buy a car. This is like on Craigslist. He said this car is for $3,000, $4,000, and somebody's going to go in there and roll that price down. Now this is his starting high offer, and it sucks. And odds are when it goes through and they get it, if they get anything passed after it goes through the Republicans, they might shorten that check. There might be some more stipulations. They might move some of it to the rich. And I know more than likely they're not going to pass the $15 minimum wage. I know he's in favor of that. The Democrats are behind it. And they're still letting the Democrats are still letting the Republicans walk all over them. It's almost, and they're represented and funded by the same people.
You remember when the scandal with AOC and Jimmy Dore first emerged? It started by her butting herself in the conversation between Jimmy Dore and another person on Twitter and saying, "Wait a minute, we got Pelosi to back $15 an hour. That's why we can't vote on Medicare for all now." Pelosi had been supporting $15 an hour. So this was a BS excuse, and that's what started the whole thing. They act like, Jimmy was tweeting at AOC and egging her on, and then she responded. No, it was her butting herself in the conversation, but telling a flat out lie. Pelosi wasn't convinced recently to support $15 an hour. This is something that she has been for, and this is something that Biden's been for as well. It should be more than $15 an hour. They have to aim high. That is true. But also, to be fair, the bill that they almost passed that McConnell blocked in the Senate currently is still $2,000. But it is true that that there's been rumors spread. They want to bring it down to $1,400 because they're going to say the $600 was part of the $2,000. And so as a result, they could bring in another bill and drop it, which would be another example of the Democrats backing on their word. So, yeah. And AOC has been a big disappointment when it comes to anti-imperialism. I can get into that as well. It begs the question: is she really a socialist? Right? I mean, on the domestic front, there's a lot I agree with her on, but on foreign policy, she's a big disappointment.
David Fox, anything to add to this?
Well, it's interesting too, because I think it's a good lesson learned that we don't put our faith in we call it the parliamentary system here. Important to run candidates and that, yep, and put the voice out there, but to actually put our faith in a party like, for example, you guys, the Democrats, for us in Australia, the Labor Party, to actually come through with the goods. It just comes to clearly show this is just another expose that they're not going to come to they're not going to come to the party with it. What's interesting how they're using the tactic there, and then what they'll do if they can't get anything passed, they'll blame the other side. Oh, we couldn't do it, which they could actually do it. I don't know actually how it works in the Senate over there. I'm assuming if they've got a majority, this should be able to sail through pretty quickly without having long debates about it. But they're just trying to do everything stall, and then obviously say, oh, too hard, we couldn't do it, and then start blaming. No, it was Tweedledum that did that, wasn't us. And yeah,
well, it's a simple majority, right? So, for example, they cannot convict Trump under impeachment without 2/3 majority. It's unconstitutional. They can't do a simple majority in the Senate on that. Therefore, they can't just rely on Democrat votes. However, on other things, they can motion for a simple majority. And if that's the case, Kamala Harris, who's president of the Senate, would be the tiebreaker.
Right.
Okay. No.
I made a controversial statement earlier in the week, and my position is getting a $15 minimum wage, getting health care, getting economic relief, getting student debt relief is far more important than impeaching Trump. And that was controversial. And and I'll double down on that statement, because it seems like when it comes to something like the riot was attack on their house, it's attack on their system. When it comes to their defending their system or going against their political rivals, they're ready. They're on it. 1, 2, 3, and they're making these. And also, if you listen to those, I was listening to NPR to and from work, and they played on repeat these speeches at the impeachment hearing. And they were some of the most national chauvinist bullshit speeches I have ever heard in my life. America's the best country in the world. This is an attack on our democracy, the greatest country and the best democracy in the world. Now, on repeat over and over and over again. These are supposed to people represent us. And any comment on that?
What do you expect, right? Because NPR is just propaganda for the Democrats. They're part of the bourgeois press, you know?
Yeah. As John Pilger actually correctly pointed out one time, when it's already an Australian term, but it was Parliament, there you got the two parties. It's basically two factions of the ruling class. One's Labor, one's Liberal. You know, and like yourselves in the US, you got two factions of the ruling class. One's Republican, one's Democrat. They're there to maintain and uphold, and make sure capitalism continues, and put policies in place to make sure profits ensured.
I think a lot of where I'm going with that is, I mean, like if you read my shirt, I am a revolutionary. What does I am a revolutionary means? It means I don't have one bit of faith in their system, whatever. As Suarez's shirt, Comrade Che Guevara, as his speech at the UN, never have confidence in imperialism, not at all. This is not our house. This is not our democracy.
Imperialism, not even one iota. And he also said that a revolutionary is the highest form of the human species. I mean, you can't get any higher than that. So, you know, reformism, right, or especially bourgeois reformism that we saw in the form of Bernie Sanders, you know, you could say he had good intentions, but within the imperialist system, you know, and I've written about this, you know, the internal imperialism that the people of color and the working class and the poor have faced for decades in this nation. You know, you can't tackle imperialism by trying to fix the imperialist capitalist system. It's unfixable. It can only be replaced. There has to be a revolutionary scenario. But what happened at the Capitol was a counter-revolution. And so it is scary. But does that mean every single individual that stepped into the Capitol was evil and completely brainwashed by Trump? No. You know, I'm not really focused on trying to convert Trump supporters, but I understand that there were probably some elements there that were apolitical and were not thoroughly indoctrinated, that were there generally out of desperation and wanting to change things. And that's not the way to go about it, to go to the right. Therefore, there's a void because the Democrats, which I call the fake left in general, there's that void on the left. And therefore, those people that are not getting educated about socialism are going to the right and the far right. And that's what you saw culminated at the Capitol.
Right. I think Comrade Matt Cedillo, who does the study every week, I'm behind putting on my study, but he's been studying Marx with the professor for a while now. He made a really good tweet, and I really liked it, or tweet or Facebook status. He said, "Don't defend the fascist, and don't put any faith in the police state." And I think that's right. I mean, these are horrible. We shouldn't. There's a danger both ways. I think we should try to. Working class people, we should understand what's going on. Even some of these middle class, I call them small business tyrants. A lot of these people who, it's been said over and over again, I've heard many positive leftists say this. A lot of people there are oppressed. They're small business people that treat their employees like shit. A lot of them are racist, but they have been treated badly by the larger capitalists. I mean, they're little more than employees, even though they own their business. The capitalism be so monopolized, and in a period of crisis, you know, it just only further monopolized capitalism. It gave more power to Amazon and them, but instead of uniting with the working class to fight against the big capitalists, they're saying we love capitalism, we want our spot in capitalism, and they defend capitalism and racism and imperialism, even at least on the surface, more fervently than the big capitalists.
It's just the petty bourgeois versus the corporations, really, you know. In that scenario, at least,
Comrade Fox, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, look, I think when we had a discussion last week, so I think one of the big concerns out of this now is the crackdown on everyone's civil liberties, including ours as well. It's basically exposed like Silicon Valley's power because the government over there in the US did not request Facebook and Twitter to shut down accounts. They just went according to their own business, the blacklisting a lot of, and also a lot of people losing their jobs as well, and obviously blacklisting from potential employment. And for us, those of us from the socialist, Marxist, communist backgrounds, that's something we've always got to be aware of as well, how they got the power of employers can just easily, your potential for a job, that might be a good paying job, yep, great, and then all of a sudden, look, you weren't successful or you happened to start, and then 5 minutes later, you get the tap on the shoulder. Look, you're really not needed anywhere. You're no longer required. And so I think I know some people were cheering. I know there's some groups there we don't miss being kicked off Facebook, but I think, look, cheering it all on like that, that's just playing into the imperialists, the bourgeoisie's hands as well, because we've got, just how far this is going to go. And it's not only that, it's also how far it's going to be. It's not just social media clamping down civil liberties. What about elsewhere as well? Because this will probably throw an obstacle and in our ability to try and organise workers on the ground, be it in a union, be it in a community group, be it whatever. So this is something we've always got to take into account. I believe some other groups are now being kicked off. I mean, look, with the racist stuff and the real obnoxious stuff, yeah, sure, there should be a standard there, I mean, no one's got a right to go out and be just nasty. But the fact is, at the end of the day, we've got to look down to what's the outlying agenda here as well. Because I believe as the crisis of capitalism is worsening, it's becoming more sharper and antagonistic. Obviously, our civil liberties, just our basic things we do enjoy are going to be further eroded.
Yeah, and I was banned from Facebook this past August. I mean, August last year, and a lot of leftists were silenced in the summer. So this is not just a problem on the right, and unfortunately, it has a kind of a domino effect, dissenting voices in general. And I'm not going to say every form of dissent is right. There's far right dissent. I mean, you had what happened in Hong Kong. Basically, they were being used as tools of the U.S. empire against China. So not every form of protest. I mean, of course, a lot of that was rioting as well, right? Like you saw at the Capitol. It's not really protests, but not every form of dissent means that they're legitimate and what they're doing. At the same time, people shouldn't be censored. There should be an encouragement of debate. Hate and racism, as you said, David, shouldn't be permitted. But at the same time, to use the crisis at the Capitol to silence people and to, what was the name of that alternative social media that was deplatformed by Google and the rest, and they had to shut down Parler? Yeah, that's really scary that they shut down Parler at the same time that they're throwing people out of the regular social media. But at the same time, now people are joining Telegram. I recently joined Telegram. And it's actually bad for the government now, right? Because if these people want to conspire against the government, they can do so more secretly using encrypted apps like Telegram, not WhatsApp, which is owned by Facebook. We know that. And so as a result, people are going on Signal and Telegram, and they're going underground, and there's been people that are arrested on the far right or the alt-right and told by the feds, don't post stuff online. So it's like, what, you want them to go underground? You want to make it easier to conspire against the government? It just seems stupid to me,
Right on. I think that's a good question. There's been a round of repression of left voices. The new African Black Panther Party, the leader, had a knock on his door, and it was the FBI. It was the New Jersey State Police, and it was the FBI asking him, "What did you have anything to do with the Capitol? What the hell's a Black Panther have to do with damn fascists at the Capitol?" And then you got we were going to bring this up earlier. They've been saying, "Oh, this is actually Antifa," and it's like, and then the FBI is actually acting on this ignorant bullshit. Like somehow it was actually the left that did this.
It's the guy that goes by John the Activist, I think, and he was ostracized by all the BLM and Antifa groups in his town that he went to. He was thrown out of these events and told to leave because they saw him as a provocateur, as a secret right winger. And then he shows up at the Capitol. And if you actually look at his video that they refer to, he's not leading any groups. He's not setting any people up. He's following them and egging them on. egging the Trump supporters on. I mean, so they're using one individual now, John the activist, to say, well, you see, Antifa was leading the whole thing, and this is just a cop-out to prevent the right from taking responsibility for the riot that they had implemented.
That's right. And the other thing, I mean, just to hang up, I mean, I had to set up a VK account just in case my Facebook's ever shut down or Twitter account's ever shut down myself, and so at least I've got something to go to. But I got attacked by a couple of Trump supporters because they blamed Antifa for it. And I explained Antifa is not a registered organisation that we have a membership card with a membership number, your name and details on it. It's not that at all. If you're against fascism, you're previously Antifa, anti-fascist. That's what it means. And they just call me, what do you want? How do you know, boyo? And all these names. I just stopped giving
at bars. And they didn't even know that. They said Antifa stands for anti-fascist. I had no idea. And they're talking to me as if like they're experts at Antifa. It's just incredible ignorance.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And I made a controversial statement or conclusion and determination. When I was doing the study with Comrade David Fox, we did the 3 internationals, William Z. Foster, 6-part series, several hours long. I recommend people go back on that. But we were going over what fascism is. And I came to the conclusion, based off Dimitrov's definition, that Trump wasn't a fascist. I mean, his definition of a fascist was, or demagogue, but Dimitrov's definition of a fascist was the most chauvinist, check, racist, most imperialist. The Democrats are often attacking him from the right on the imperialist question.
Yeah.
And then, and it's almost like if you combine both the horrible qualities of the Democrats and Republicans, take away all democratic rights, and then you got fascism. But what I see is Trump has been more like a racist libertarian. And a way you can see that he has been a racist libertarian is if you look at how he handled the COVID. When he handled the COVID, he's like, there is no federal strategy. Basically, we're not spending money on poor people. It was a way of taking resources away from workers.
He banned Chinese from entering the country, and then stopped masks from being, like, the post office offered, right, free masks to the public, and he put a stop to that. So he literally put people in harm's way. But he had kind of a libertarian isolationist position in shutting the borders down, which didn't help the problem because it already got here by then.
So basically, he kicked down to avoid blame and literally killing people. It wasn't a mobilize the military, create an authoritarian, a top-down structure, authoritarian death camps. It was let the poor motherfuckers die through from this kind of like libertarian thing. And I think a lot of, if you look at the people that marched on the White House, they're these small business people are like, oh, if only they stop taxing me, if they stop doing that. And then you have the larger capitalist imperialists that are kind of using all of these dynamics, using all these forces to get things to go in their interest. And I made another.
Dust, real quick. So when you say libertarian, I want to make a distinction here, right? Because there are people like Chomsky, there's people in Europe, Australia, and other parts of the world that I'm sure that when they call themselves libertarian, it means something else, right? I mean, there's progressive libertarian. Yeah. There's even been talk that some consider themselves progressive libertarian. So when you're talking about libertarian, you're talking specifically, because we have an international audience, about American libertarians from the corporatized libertarian party that are right-wingers, the isolationists. That's what you're talking about. When their foreign policy is non-interventionist, it's because they want to be isolationist and shut the border. It's not because they're humanitarians or they're anti-imperialists or anything like that.
Ron Paul went as far as he wanted to get rid of birthright citizenship. I mean, this is...
And Ron Paul was thrown on Facebook, which I thought was ironic because libertarians have been saying they're a private corporation and they can do what they want. It's like, well, now you're supposed to. Has been silenced.
Oh, yeah.
It's been bad about it, but yeah, now he's been silenced,
Exactly.
Shit, I forgot what I was going to say. What was the other...
I'm sorry.
I made another controversial. Oh, the other controversial statement I was saying is, okay. So my main stance is anti-imperialism, and I see anti-imperialism isn't a war. It isn't It isn't, you can't do imperialism. Imperialism is the global economic system characterized by monopoly capitalism, specifically a group of oil and banking cartels based out of Wall Street and London, and they extract value from the workers here, from the larger imperialist bloc, and then super exploit the oppressed nations within the Western Bloc and the oppressed nations in the global South in general.
Well, the London Bank of Venezuelan gold, right? And the it's full of Peruvian gold or gold stole from the Incas. So there's so much resources that was taken from Latin America in particular that the Europeans still have a hold of, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I've also made a statement that if you are not explicitly anti-imperialist, you will become a pawn of the imperialist. And that's just how it is. They will manipulate it. They're the most powerful person on the block, and they will use different forms. They will pay you. They will silence you. They will stop you. They will kill you. Whatever they have to do to get you working in their interest, they will do. And I've recently made the statement that both the sheepdogs and the fascist goons are simply pawns of the imperialists. Now, one of them is evil and racist and disgusting. The other one comes off as progressive and positive. But I mean, the sheepdogs are there to convince leftists and working class people to go along and back the system, back disgusting, horrible candidates like Biden. And these fascist, racist goon squads are meant to attack communists, attack people of color, and become controlled opposition. So we line up behind the Democrats.
Yeah, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, me as a Latin socialist, she really offends me. You know, we were talking about AOC earlier. When it comes to imperialism, I mean, I think she's pretty much willingly ignorant now when it comes to Bolivia and Venezuela. You know, she defers to party leadership. Pelosi, I mean, Pelosi gave a standing ovation to Guaido when they presented him to the State of the Union. This is not socialism. So people think that she's a model for what a Latino or Latina socialist should be. No, it has to be number one, anti-imperialism. And even though Tulsi Gabbard and Ilhan Omar did not call themselves socialists, they were more anti-imperialist than AOC or other members of the squad. You know, you had Omar that interrogated Elliot Abrams, you know, convicted war criminal, over making him the liaison for Venezuela. You know, you had who was the one I mentioned before, Omar? Tulsi Gabbard, you know, very strongly as a veteran has come out against U.S. imperialism. And she actually used those words, imperialism. So she hasn't been against intervention as an isolationist. No, she's come at it actually as an anti-imperialist, not a socialist one, but somebody who certainly is worried about U.S. imperialism and excesses in the world. And so you had her as a presidential candidate. You had Omar in the Congress. So to me, anti-imperialism is number one if you're going to take on socialism or if you're going to enter U.S. imperial politics and try to change things.
Right. So we've been going back and forth. The show's been a little bit chaotic. Let's try to wrap up the news portion. Comrade Fox, if you just want to give us a brief update on the situation with Assange and your personal connection as an Australian.
Yes, look, I believe they're still waiting for the appeal to be heard in the UK there at the moment. Now, the silence from our federal government here has just been deafening, to say the least. They've had every opportunity to actually put the pressure on the UK government to release Assange and even offer him to come back here to Australia because, by rights, Assange hasn't done anything wrong. He absolutely whatsoever. Even when he released all that material in the first place, he had lawyers check all that out. It was all good to go. So this is just a deliberate ploy to have him extradited to the US and just put him on some sort of shady charge and have him in prison for the rest of his natural life. But yeah, there's silence on there. But on both political parties, I have to be complicit. I'm not just blaming the current federal government, but also the previous ones we've had under the Labor governments as well. They've had every opportunity to put the pressure on to have him released and brought back here. What was actually the refreshing thing, at least the governments such as the Mexican government's offered him asylum there in exile if he is released. That hearing he had the other day about his bail was obviously, disappointing, to say the least again. But yeah, obviously, Peter Hardley, not surprising either. I mean, the thing is, what gets me, he's not an actual threat to the community. if anyone that applies for bail, usually they have a look at if you're immediate threat to the community. He wasn't an immediate threat to anyone, but they just and now he's freezing there in that Belmarsh prison, I think it is. Obviously, and his physical condition worsening. So, I just thought to just quickly update you. I believe there's going to be a lot more organised around Julian Assange here in Australia as well. But we've just been at a bit of a schmozzle of a start for this year. But obviously, as things pan out, there's going to be a lot more happening around that
David,
issue.
I wanted to ask you something about Assange. So the progressive community in Australia, right? We have this false narrative here in the United States that only right wingers can possibly support Assange. What's the situation over there? Is there significant, progressive elements within the community that are coming out for Assange in his home country?
Yes, there is, and I mean through progressive, not even through very respective socialist parties and communist parties, but so it's just generally people that might be both, and all what it is like through the Greens, for example, all those type of political things, but also too people are just generally progressive through the unions. The Media Entertainment Arts Alliance, which is the union that covers journalists and entertainers and all that, musicians, they've been pretty vocal about that as well. There have been elements within the federal parliament. Andrew Wilkie, who's an independent member for the federal seat of Hobart, he's actually an ex-ASIO. Intelligence and all that. So he's been very vocal about that. And also, interesting enough, someone from the right wing, George Christensen, who's a member of the National Party, a member from North Queensland. Although I don't completely disagree with everything else, but he's actually been vocal on about having Julian Assange released as well. And then there's a few people within the Australian Labor Party as well. But I think there was a lot more groundswell about that. And obviously, you guys have heard John Pilger. He's been doing a lot of good work around that as well.
John Pilger's done excellent work in Latin America with his documentary there. I've been very familiar with him for a long time, and I'm happy to hear that he's continuing the struggle. A fellow Australian to fight for Julian Assange on his behalf. And I really think Obrador is the greatest Mexican president since Cardenas. It's just spectacular that he's come out now to try to petition Assange to be granted asylum within his country. He did a lot to help Evo Morales as well when the coup in Bolivia happened. And this is right next door to the U.S. empire. So Obrador is a very progressive and principled person, and he gives me hope that him and other leaders in Latin America can stand up and help facilitate Assange being granted asylum in his country.
Mm-hmm. No, very good.
Right on. I added Suarez was a little bit off frame, so I added a fourth thing so it opened up on his picture. If anybody's worried about that, I put the Anti-Imperialist America logo, so Suarez's full picture can be shown. Alex, is there anything else you wanted to add about why we're talking about Julian Assange? Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, when I was making my documentary, which of course we had to put on hold because of COVID, embassy protectors. There's a scene in trailer 2, people can see, where I'm interviewing Bolivians about Assange, in Spanish, and, there's English subtitles there. And, they were talking about, like, why wasn't Lopez forced from the Spanish embassy in Caracas, right? We talked about Lopez earlier. And they said, well, Maduro respects international law. And even though he knows Lopez is a terrorist, he's been granted asylum by the Spanish government. He's going to be in the embassy. And I said, except if it's Assange, right? People that are defending Lopez on the right are, they hate, a lot of these people hate Assange, but they'll talk about, Lopez's human rights, but not if it's Assange, right? And he said, yeah, because the capitalists don't support Assange, so we were talking about him in that regard. But in general, it's important to understand progressives, especially in Latin America, love Assange, love what he did exposing U.S. war crimes and U.S. imperialism. And I've recently, I don't know if you don't want to talk about it later in the show, wrote a book of the same title, Embassy Protector, because I had to put the film on hold. But yeah, I can get into that at any point. But it's important for people to understand what happened at the Venezuelan embassy in the center of empire in Washington, D.C., and how it helped change things.
That's a good transition. Let's end our news section and let's go into our interview section. Can you tell us a little bit more about the new book you have out? Sure.
It was just recently published. This is actually the first interview I've done talking about it. I was going to do another interview, but that got postponed. And so yeah, just recently released. And the son of one of my heroes who passed away last year, Kevin Z's, his son Alex Z's, actually wrote the foreword to this book, and that's part of Kevin Z's legacy. He was one of the main people that was leading the actions at the Venezuelan embassy, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with. And if you don't mind, I want to read his brief foreword that he wrote for the book so people can get an idea of what it's about. Is that okay if I can go into that now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yep.
Okay, so I have it here. My father, Kevin Z's, was no stranger to civil disobedience. Growing up with an activist for a father, the entire concept of fighting injustice was something we were accustomed to. Although it did take him time, a long time, how much time, half a lifetime, several decades, to get to the point where he would use civil disobedience as a tool for protesting. I remember the first time he was ever arrested for a protest. I was in high school, and he was protesting in front of a federal building against the war on drugs, which was his core issue at the time. The week before it happened, he sat down with us and explained that he was going to be doing the protest and would probably be arrested, but that he wanted us to know he would be okay. There is a typical routine when it comes to political arrests, especially in Washington, D.C., where the authorities are all too used to protesters. And after a while, you become desensitized. I'm going to continue on here. Okay. I went to hundreds of protests with him over the years, and I'd seen Dad get arrested 3 times for various issues. It came with the job, so to speak, and didn't faze me. But this particular action in the Venezuelan embassy was very different. This was a political action where there was no routine for how the authorities would behave. And because of that, for the first time in a long time, this was a case where I was worried about what could happen once those inside the embassy were inevitably arrested. Allergies. So it was an honor to get in touch with him. And, his father was very close to me and was a supporter of my film. And, I saw him at the Zoom funeral, and for him to contribute, this forward to my book was very touching. And I think it's important for people to remember the sacrifice of Kevin Z's. And actually, the last case that Kevin was looking at, that he was going to write for his website, Popular Resistance, which his life partner, Dr. Margaret Flowers now runs, was the Assange case. So Kevin was not focused on Venezuela. He was focused on Palestine, Assange, issues of anti-imperialism. He helped me write my article about Che Guevara for Popular Resistance. He had shown my trailer on his tour when he was fundraising for their legal defense. And this was an important case, and I'd known him for a long time back during Occupy days. We had been in touch since 2010, and I went there to try to save lives. I knew how urgent the situation was. I knew that they weren't going to give up. Kevin was among the final 4 that were inside the embassy, and I went there to help. I didn't go there with the intention to make a film. That came about later on, seeing how the media didn't properly cover it, how nobody else had a major film project. And the state went to great length, the Trump regime, to try to silence us, to try to prevent us from writing books and making films and being heard, to expose the barbarities and injustices done to our comrades inside the embassy, the siege that was constant. Every time we brought food or water, we were beaten. Electricity was cut off. They had to collect rainwater to survive. They were under siege for nearly 40 days. Some of them were elders. People's lives were at risk, and it was very traumatic. But I could go home and not have nightmares, because I could go home and after all that and sleep with the conscience clear, because I knew I did everything I could to help them. And Kevin was able to live, for more than a year after those things had happened. But in September last year, has succumbed to a heart attack. So he was a great man. We had a lot of loss last year, and I really hope that this book can do him some justice, and that eventually the film can finally come out, which we're almost done completing, exposing what the Trump regime, which is now leaving, at the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C., how they tried to oppose the Guaido regime, and how they used the Venezuelan exiles to beat us up, or sometimes Secret Service themselves, just for simply trying to bring food and water to our comrades inside. Even Reverend Jeff Jackson himself had to intervene. So this is a big story that a lot of people don't know about, and that people shouldn't forget, and that hopefully will get out there,
Wow.
Very good.
So what's let's see. So what's the title of the book? What's it about?
It can be found on Kindle and Amazon. It's called Embassy Protectors, with the same title that the film is going to be. And I'm Al R. Suarez on Twitter, and on Amazon you can see my books. It's my 13th book. It's a recent book that came out, Embassy Protectors. All my novels have been nonfictions, a lot of them semi-biographical about parts of my life. I'm working on my first fiction now in my spare time. But yeah, so it's a book that I think that will help people get a better idea of what it would like as an activist to go to DC and why I went to DC, and spark their interest for the film. And the film's going to get a lot more details. It's going to be probably film at least 2 hours. We had like 35 different people that we interviewed for it. Audio for my interview with Kevin on my podcast will be used for the film. We were going to go to Maryland to interview Kevin, and then he passed away, so we weren't able to do that. But he will be in the film, and he will be remembered. So.
Very good. Yep. So for those folks out there, especially in Australia, if you're interested, it's called Embassy Protectors by Alex Suarez. You can order that on either Amazon or Kindle, or obviously just go to your Twitter page and click on links from there on.
Yeah, there's a new GoFundMe, because I shut down the old GoFundMe when we had the film on hold. But there's a new GoFundMe I started now to try to propel the film again. And I'll make sure when this show's done to DM it to Dust. I'm sure he can put it up on YouTube. And those funds will help to pay for editors that will finalize this film, hopefully, that we can finally get out.
Brilliant.
Right on. Maybe you could tell us a little bit of the experience you had as an embassy protector. What maybe what the situation was and what your part was in it.
So there was a comrade. Actually, he had met Caleb Maupin once. He had been in RT a couple times. I had been in RT as well. And his name was Marty Droll. And why do I mention him in connection with this? Because he passed away before this happened. He passed away back in 2014. It's because it was the anniversary. So he died on May 13th, 2014. And the 5th anniversary of that was May 13th, 2019. That was a very important date for me. It was my final day at the embassy. And we did an action, and you can see portions of it in trailer 1, where I was with Sherry Honkala. You know, she ran for vice president of the Green Party in 2016, and other comrades trying to get food in. And so what happened was Aminta, who was a Nicaraguan activist that was inside the embassy, that shortly before that had left the embassy. She had been malnourished and she felt weak, and so she left the embassy. And Kevin Z's Margaret, the others, stayed in. So she had left the embassy like the day before. She was still recovering. She showed up to try to bring a bag of food with Sherry and other comrades, and I ran up with the veteran, and I see Mateo, who's this detestable figure who's going to be exposed in the film. He's exposed in the book. He's a Venezuelan exile. He's been quoted, I believe, in the New York Times as well over this. And so Mateo, and he has a tug of war going on with a backpack full of supplies between him and Amit, who's small and weak, malnourished. I immediately, as soon as I see what's going on, I go into survival mode. I do a wrestling move, get him down on the ground, pull the bag out, and my co-director David's behind me, and he takes the bag, and we're able to get the bag out. And the most emotional part of that story, I didn't realize it was the day that Marty had died. It's like his spirit was there, and he knew Sherry Honkala too. He was living in Philly, and I realized that later on. But the most powerful part of that story is a couple of days later, on the May 15th, I believe was the day before they shut it down, which was the 16th, when I already went home. I'm looking at the live feed. I'm looking at David, and he's there with Jesse Jackson. And they get 3 bags up, I believe, 3 or 4 bags up, because Jesse Jackson himself had intervened to try to save lives. And then I recognized one of the bags was the bag that we got out. And I got to interview Kevin about that in late May, soon after he got out of jail. The first thing he did after getting out of jail, nearly 40 days under siege, was march on the White House. That was Kevin Z's. He didn't go home. He didn't go to sleep. He didn't get an IV and go to the hospital. He went, and he was trespassed, a couple miles from the embassy, which is pretty far from the White House walking, if you know Washington, D.C. And so he went from the point of the trespass where he couldn't pass and led the march on the White House. He had just got out of jail. He had just been recovering for 40 days under siege nearly in the embassy, and he marched on the White House. That was Kevin Z's. It's rare that you can have somebody with such revolution energy and such leadership and such courage and such integrity. And so, but yeah, I got to interview him about it and tell him how that bag got up. And it's funny because there's a veteran, part of Veterans for Peace, Al Gutowski, I think his last name is. And he's badass, man. He was a political prisoner. I mean, I could tell you a lot about him. But anyways, he was there to try the same thing as me, try to bring food. And so Kevin said, who was the guy who brought turkey spam one of those bags? And then later after the show, I get a call from Al, and he's like, that was me. That was my turkey spam that got in there. But yeah, I mean, I would say 10 times we try to deliver bags, 9 of them, they would steal the bags from us and beat us up and arrest us, right? All times at night, they always had guard to try to starve them out. And these were American citizens there at the invitation of legitimate government of Maduro, because under international law, when there's a rupture of declaration, you're supposed to let a third country take it over. Turkey had offered to, the Swiss had offered to take over the U.S. Embassy in Caracas. As a matter of fact, and this was mentioned in court, how could Guaido be the real president, right? I mean, they never took over the embassy anyways. But how could he be the real president if Trump is sending a delegate to speak to Maduro to negotiate the Swiss taking over the embassy? And you know what Maduro said, and this is going to be in the film. Maduro said, yeah, of course the Swiss can take over the U.S. embassy as soon as you let the Turks take over the Venezuelan embassy in D.C. And we have American comrades right now in our embassy holding on to it. That conversation actually happened. So they had this fiction in court that I witnessed. I went back to D.C. in January 2020, a couple months before COVID, to witness the hearing and to see Kevin and everybody. And, in the hearing and in the trial, they say Guaido's the president. This is all a fiction. And they said they have control of the embassy. I went back to the embassy. It was like going back to an empty corpse. It was vacant. And it was a victory because it was declared a mistrial. Even though they stacked the jury with CIA and FBI guys, kind of like they would want to do with Assange. But it was still declared a mistrial because 2 jurors held out because they couldn't understand. I mean, the judge was blocking so much information from them being able to get. And, it was a victory because they never accomplished what they wanted. The Guaido's forces never took over the embassy. They took over the consulate in New York, but by the time they got to Washington, the protection, I mean, the collective that was there, it wasn't in vain. It was beautiful. And Kevin, who was also a lawyer and brilliant strategist, his leadership, I mean, they couldn't have done it without him. And it was such an honor to know him for so long and for him to be so supportive of my film. And I really hope that all the efforts of that film are not in vain, that we can get that out there and that people can read the book and they can know the truth about what happened.
Right on, man. Heroic stuff, man. That's like an action story, man. You goddamn.
I mean, Mateo was literally rapping Jesse Jackson. Mateo, the same guy I talked to, actually, John Mubarak about this. He was there. He also ran as vice president of the Greens. And Baraka is holding back with all the pressure of his body. Mateo, the same guy that I tackled to the ground, who said he was paramilitary. I don't know, but when there's a will, there's a way. You can be out of shape and still take the paramilitary guy down. So Baraka, who's not that young, not that good of shape, like me, he's holding him. And literally, Mateo's trying to grab Jesse Jackson, and the media still doesn't cover it. But you had Venezuelan exiles like that, despicable human beings that would do everything they could to try to starve the people inside. It was a microcosm of what they do in their own country. They're in favor of starving their own people, of their own sanctions. And we had Chomsky come on Trailer 2 to talk about that. Chomsky had been to Venezuela. He said even moderate members of the opposition have exposed how U.S. sanctions under Trump have killed tens of thousands of Venezuelans. It's true that Bush, Obama had sanctions, but nothing like Trump did. So Trump might have not went full imperialist and invaded a country. He preferred to back mercenaries or do sanctions, but they could be just as deadly,
Yeah.
Right on, man. Maybe let's go along with the title of the show. Maybe you could talk about what we can do as workers in the imperialist bloc. Some of those heroic actions you were talking about, but how can we build solidarity amongst workers in the imperialist bloc with oppressed nations like Venezuela?
Are you talking about anti-imperialist countries or people within the imperialist countries that want to fight their government?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're right. It's not just the United States. I mean, it's Great Britain. Europe is basically the vassal states of the United States. I mean, the Assange case proved that, right? I mean, a good example of that is George Galloway, who I've been in touch with back in the day. He came out at the beginning of the Assange case and said, well, at least it's going to be the British courts. They're very fair. And now he's coming and saying, this is a kangaroo court. I've never seen anything like this.
Yeah.
So even if he was coming in defending the British system and said, well, at least it's going to be a fair trial. They're, more indignant than anyone. And this just proves how the UK is like a vassal state of the United States in particular. And we've talked about this on a prior show, Dust. If Evo Morales, for example, right, if he was deported to if he escaped to Great Britain or France, right, he would have been on a plane back to Bolivia within a week. And you have Mexico and then later Argentina, who took an Evo Morales, who actually have a more independent foreign policy than Europe does. Yeah. And so even though Latin America doesn't have, the economic strength that Europe does, Europe right now are more of the vassal states of the United States than Latin America, which is starting to stand up, and the left is starting to return in Bolivia and Argentina and Mexico and those countries.
I hear David Fox getting excited over there. Is that a similar situation over there in Australia?
Yeah, look, that's something us. We just basically get our directions from Washington. Australia just cannot act on its own independent accord. They'll obviously get the permission from Washington if they have to, if they want to do something. And basically, the similar situation here as well. A lot of aspects. What's actually the upside of it? We've been in a lot of touch with a lot of Venezuelans. We have LASNet, which is Latin America Solidarity Network, and we've been doing a lot during this whole COVID-19 era. A lot of conferencing that, especially amongst trade unionists, which has been good. It's been refreshing, especially solidarity with a lot of the trade unions there in Venezuela as well. But it's certainly a similar situation here. Australia will just go along with what the US is doing in relation to Venezuela, and basically that's the official imperial block line. You got to take that and not work on our own independent course. And it was actually an interesting point you raised about the British courts being, and I remember that when George Galloway came out defending it. But unfortunately, even here in Australia, a lot of government think the British system's brilliant. It's a fantastic law system, and it's not. It's just this Sol Assange thing just exposed it for what it is, and it's quite a history to it, because even going back to the 1980s,
they don't care about international law, right? They don't care about international law or the ICC, nor does the United States. They just use it when it's convenient.
Yeah, and exactly. And when Thatcher was Prime Minister of Britain, at the time, you remember, had people like I think it was the Guildford Five, and others that were accused. They weren't even members of the IRA, but they were accused of terrorist acts and locked up without any proper trial and charge. And they found out they were innocent. It took them years to be released. So to say that the British system is a really great system, I think some people need to have a rethink about their position on that.
And also, there could be laws, but the question is how they apply them, right? I mean, there's things that are admirable about the Magna Carta or about the U.S. Constitution, but how are those laws being applied? Or a good example here in Florida, we have a thing called Stand Your Ground. And that is a law that has only in the course been provided for white people. And basically, it's an insane law that says if you shoot somebody in the leg under Florida law, you go to jail for about 20 years. If you don't get a good lawyer, you go up to 20 years for shooting somebody in the leg, right? But if you kill somebody and there's no witnesses and you're white and you say, I was threatened, stand your ground, you're good. That's how crazy the law is. So, so there could be a law there, but how it applied in the courts and how it's applied discriminatorily based on race, social class, etc., that matters as well.
Wow.
Right on. We're still in the interview portion. Comrade Fox, you got any questions for our guest?
Well, I think actually what further actions we can take ourselves in our respective countries, how we can link up. And obviously, Venezuela is always passion for a lot of people out there. How can we actually provide a lot more international support for Venezuela?
Well, another thing is, I heard about how even Zoom was censoring people, right? So I think now that the vaccine's coming out in Russia and Great Britain and now the United States, that more and more people get the vaccine, COVID will start to die down at some point this year. Therefore, we should have conferences in person and have our own media film and not have to rely on Zoom. And it's important face to face for there to be international conferences to build that international solidarity. To have it maybe in some central location in Europe or something, so Americans can go and Australians can go and kind of meet in the middle or something.
Yeah.
Right. Any other plugs or anything you want to put out there before we move on to the next section now?
Well, you can look me up on Twitter. I lost a lot of people when my Facebook was erased. Maybe some of them are reconnecting with me now watching the show. But I'm still active on Twitter, so I encourage people to find me on Twitter. Dust is one of my follows on there as well. Suarez, that's Suarez. I have a YouTube channel under Alex Suarez. There's embassyprotectors.org, which is the old site for the film that hopefully will revamp soon. And like I mentioned earlier, on Amazon and Kindle, the Embassy Protectors book is now available, and that'll really get you an insider view from an activist. I didn't take part in actions from day one, but from the moment that I got there in May and what transpired, it's important to know about that moment in history and the ramifications of it afterwards, how the state tried to silence us activists and prevent the word from getting out. But yeah, I encourage people to follow me on Twitter and look up the literature and look up the trailers, and hopefully the word can get out and we can continue on.
Right on. So we're going to move on to our workshop portion of this. And this is developing our skills as communists to be out in the community and talk with people that have unprincipled positions. And instead of trying to exclude everybody who has unprincipled positions and kick them out of so-called left spaces, we're going to go to the people and talk to them and address their unprincipled issues. So it's my turn to put Comrade Fox on the spot. I'm going to take off the revolutionary Dust James hat, and I am going to be a reactionary for a second. I'm going to be one of these Trump backing people, and that's what's going to happen. So let me go ahead and do that. So, Fox, don't you know this election was rigged? I mean, they lied about the war in Iraq. They lied about Libya. They're constantly lying to us. They lied about this election. Trump won the election. It's fraud. We should storm the Capitol. What they did was right.
Well, just on that, I can understand your frustration and fears and also distrust with the system. Yes, I agree. We were lied. The whole public were lied to about Iraq and also various other intervention wars as well. And certainly the distrust of the whole establishment and the political apparatus has left us very alienated. And obviously we've seen what's happened with the economy. Regarding about the election that Trump won it outright, well, okay, you have 74 million, but obviously there's about 350 million people in the US. Now, I'm only assuming that there's a lot more people would have been voting there, and what was interesting. What I've noticed that people, the votes increased for the Democrats in a lot of places, and a lot of things were just over the line, and that I get that as well. But the fact is, it did win. Were there some little hiccups? Yes, sort of. Nothing's perfect, but at the end of the day, it has been proven that no, it was a fair and legitimate election. I think what's happened, I think what also to our mindset was like the middle of last year. Sure, Trump should be able to rope it in, especially with some up against Biden, whose mental condition wasn't there with it either. I thought he'd have it as well. But obviously, what's happened to people who are also sick and tired. They voted for Biden not because they love Biden and the Democrats by any means. They just wanted to get rid of Trump. And as simple as that, and I think we should accept it. I mean, and I'm only saying too, with the other sides that would have backed Biden, if Biden lost and Trump gone in, would they be saying the same thing as well? Oh, well, Biden swept it and we won. The election's been stolen off us. I mean, it's like, where do you go with this? How far do you have to go? I believe Biden did win it, regardless if you like him or not, but that's what's happened. And I think, look, at the end of the day, if this impeachment doesn't go ahead, I mean, by all means, Trump has got every right to run in 4 years' time.
Comrade Suarez, how would you respond to that if someone told you that?
I understand the American people are suffering. I understand that the promises of government have not been fulfilled and that this pandemic and the shutdown has been cruel to large sections of the American public. Therefore, I understand the frustrations and wanting to do something drastic, right? But why not consider that people at the same time are manipulating you, people with power, people with money who don't give a crap about you. You know, if you're a working class American, you know, struggling to put food on the plate for your family, why would you let yourself be used by somebody like Trump, who's a billionaire who doesn't give a crap about you? These people are using your emotions and they're selling you out to try, and they've betrayed you. Therefore, you should try to think as an independent person. Our first president was an independent, George Washington. So that's very American, actually, to be an independent thinker and to be a critical thinker and not just accept what Fox News tells you and the lies that they tell you. You know, you have to think outside that and consider other philosophies that can be effective, that can help you implement those changes that you're trying to strive for, and work with those people, unite with those people towards making those changes.
Right on, man. Passionate. Let's see how I'd respond. Well, first, I'm going to respond to you right quickly, man. Like, I think when you're talking with, it's kind of hard because you want to be able to say the language like you're talking with a reactionary. And I think what you did there with George Washington was interesting because they like George Washington. George Washington's like is America and everything they claim to do. So you just took George Washington and be like, Trump's a traitor and you're not being independent. And I think that was a great talking point. But then the leftist part of me is like, goddamn, George Washington put down Shays and the working class. So it's like, so it's kind of like sometimes some of that shit that's true, you choose what you say. It doesn't have to be said right then.
Also, what I do to try to convince them in the bar, Dust, is if they're part Native American, a lot of right wingers in Florida have part Seminole or part Cherokee or whatever. And, you know, I say, well, Trump, look what he did. The very first thing he did was shut down Standing Rock. And a lot of them know about Standing Rock, or I tell them what it was about. I was there. And, you know, so you use something that you find out about them because a lot of them are proud of their Native American heritage and say, well, look at all these things Trump did against Native Americans, all these lawsuits, all these control of the casino, shutting it down in Standing Rock. So you find things, you know, and a lot of them come from an independent background and then they've succumbed to republicanism because of Trump and they've been deceived by him. But you try to open up their eyes and use something that they said to try to think, okay, nobody's ever talked to me this way before. Let me try. So I'm not the type of person to say never talk to these guys. Some of them are too far gone. Some of them are too extreme. But it doesn't mean you can't talk to some of them.
Yeah. And the other thing, too, is a point to raise, did Trump raise the minimum wage to the $15 now? I think there's a big campaign about that in the US. And he gave absolute tax cuts to all these multinationals. The rich got richer and then all the workers were still poorer. So, I mean, you know, at the end of the day, when they're saying, did Trump provide you with the bread and butter, the dinner on your table that night, as he allowed you the ability to pay off your house, you didn't lose your house through foreclosures and all that? And I think these important bread and butter issues need to be raised with them as well.
It's interesting what Trump did on that front, because when he basically said there was no federal COVID plan, and then he put all the pressure onto the states did not have the power to bail out the working class and the middle class. They just simply didn't have that power. All they could do was shut it down. So Trump's backwards, murderous neglect hurt the middle class and working class and helped his so-called enemy, Bezos and Walmart, and then all those people. And because they were able to call this was the twisting, this was the narrative that Trump did. He was able to blame the Democratic governors for shutting down the economy when it was his failed response to take initiative on the federal level. And his economic policies, which were basically trickle-down economics, it was leading to, it was accelerating a crash because of overproduction. And so his economic policies were shit, but it did help. His economic policies did help enrich a few maybe lower scale, large manufacturing because they had less tax to give them tax cuts. But
let me tell you,
it's what crashed the economy. It's what helped crash the economy with these neoliberal policies.
So let me tell you real quick. So something else, you know, a Southern rightist, I like to tell them, like, what are you doing supporting a rich Yankee? You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, I mean, Trump's a Northerner. He's from New York. I mean, now he's registered in Florida, but you know, it's like, what are you doing? And then they make them think because they're not used to people talking to them like that. You know, like they're used to being, you know, Fox News every day. The whole family are all right wingers and Trumpers, and they don't think that old thinking that like, oh yeah, I'm working class. I used to hate rich Yankees. Like, so you tell them certain things to make them think. You know.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's a whole cultural discussion. Like Trump is like, he's like a working class person's view of what they think a rich person is. Because, you know, they never see a he's the rich. He's a reality TV star. He's like, he's like Reagan or what have you, you know. All right. So we'll move on. We'll move on to the next point. We discussed this earlier, but we'll go ahead and go with it. I'm going to pretend to be a right winger for a second, and David Fox is going to answer back. Okay, let's go. The events at the Capitol were disgraceful, but it was not good patriot American Trump lovers. It was them Antifa fuckers.
Well, let's put this back into perspective a bit. Well, first of all, Antifa is short for anti-fascist. So basically, if you're against fascism, that's what it is. It's actually not like I've said before. It's not a registered organisation. There's no actual document proof that was Antifa. I believe it was someone named James or John Sullivan, or that was being disowned by everybody. But he wasn't the one that led it. What happens? Everyone was set up big time at Capitol Hill, misled by Trump, who sent them into a death trap. I mean, if Antifa happened to be there along with Black Lives Matter, there would have been more a battle, a big, massive street battle out in the street that wouldn't have descended onto the stairs at Capitol Hill. Obviously, and both sides know who each other are. Let's face it, both sides, and there would have been more cops there if they knew Antifa turned up. It would have been like full-on military crackdown then and there. But basically, it comes down to it. You were misled by Trump. I mean, all means you got the right to protest the decision of the Congress and the Senate. But at the end of the day, you were misled by Trump. He sent everyone into a death trap because he turned his backs onto everyone, because as said his parting comments, like he said, look, we want a peaceful transition. He doesn't condone what happened. That was basically, here's the knife, I'm stabbing you right in the back. Thank you very much for your vote.
Yeah, not only, well, go ahead. Could I answer the question now?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, not only did he stab them in the back, he said, I will be there. I will be to the Capitol today. I will be with you. Not metaphysically. Trump said, I'll be with you. I'll be backing you up. I'll be down there at the Capitol building with you. Yep. Did he ever show up? Show up? If this is not hanging his people out to dry, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
And has he condemned the people that entered the Capitol that have been arrested by the FBI? I mean, condemned the feds for arresting them? Mm-hmm. No. So, this is a betrayal by Trump. And again, we understand your frustrations, but you let yourself be used. And it's time to take this as a learning lesson and find alternative ways to protest without having to play into the hands of the liberals. And you need to look up the definition of things, right? Being liberal is the same thing as progressive or socialist. And progressive and socialist have been fighting for working people for centuries. So this is not, they are not the enemy that Fox News is telling you. You need to stop watching corporate media and Fox News and think independently.
That's right. Very good.
Let's see. I mean, it's obvious it wasn't Antifa. These people are desperate. Like we go on to like the economic collapse. It's like anything that protects their hero, they'll believe. That's why this whole QAnon conspiracy spread like wildfire. I mean, things are bad. Things are fucked up. People want a hero, and then people don't want to be told that their hero is a bastard and is using them. And then people will strike out like it's the Matrix or something, and they'll defend the system. They'll become an agent and defend the system. QAnon was this weird way of, keeping to support Trump. The COVID's a hoax. It's against Trump. And now it's just more crazy madness. This was Antifa. Everyone looks at the image. I got a meme. Yeah, you're right. It was Antifa. That was kind of a funny meme there. People wake up.
By the way, John Sullivan, John the activist, was ostracized or thrown out of BLM, and Antifa in his community. I think I mentioned this earlier, but in response, I would also mention that this guy, he was a follower. He wasn't a leader in his videos, and he's somebody that BLM and Antifa people actually detest before this happened. So to use him to say, oh, look, he was leading it. I'm not trying to attack you, but you need to reconsider that talking point that they're telling you on Fox News. It's just not true. These were your fellow Trump supporters out there.
Right on, man. I guess this will be a little bit of a short show. We're not even an hour and a half in it yet. I think we finished all our sections. Is there anything else comrades want to add?
Yeah, I just want to add to, I was meant to use item. This is also, it's only I believe a Zoom in type action. It's on January 25th, there's Global Day of Action. It's for no to war on Yemen. It's organised by the Wage Peace, Support Assange and WikiLeaks Coalition and Peace Pilgrims. You can actually just go onto Google, onto Facebook. Just look that up. Click on it. I believe it's going to be a live. It's going to be a live thing, but obviously too, this is just as important. What's been happening around other places around the world. I know this thing, what's happened at Capitol Hill and Trump and Assange, big issues, but there's also been a lot of other stuff happening as well.
And I want to make clear here, Dust, that there are fake leftists. I mean, what Caleb calls the synthetic left, that don't give a shit about the working class. That's just true. They're there for opportunistic reasons. But I think that we're socialists that really care about the working class and are willing to talk to people in the working class that have been manipulated. They're not too far gone, and hope that they can change their ways and have alternative ways of thinking. But I think we need to form a movement internationally, and especially here in the U.S. empire, to advocate for working class power. And accuse me of class reductionist, but let me tell you, racism, sexism, all forms of discrimination will cease when classless society is instituted, which should be the goal of all Marxists, no matter what form of Marxism they claim to be a part of, is to make that classless society. And then the root causes, the radical thinking that you need to fight all those systemic problems will come about when you have a classless society.
Yeah. We need to organise a united front against one common foe, and that's the capitalist class, the ones that expropriate our labour to make a profit, and that's been the root cause of the problem. Marx didn't look outside the factory; he looked inside it. What was going on there? He said, "This is where a situation like, because all us working people, regardless of the colour of your skin, your gender, or whatever other personal views are, we only got our ability to sell our labour to live." The capitalist class takes all what we produce, take it for themselves, and create it into profit.
Well, thank you for having me, guys. It's been great.
Thank you.
That's great. See, today's imperialism, today's capitalism is monopoly capitalism, which is imperialism. Lenin said, "Workers and oppressed people, workers and oppressed people unite." I guess we'll go into our chant if that's all we're going to have. We tried this. I don't know if you see this. If you guys want to repeat after me, we'll try this again. David, you want to lead it this time? I think I forgot it.
We go. What was it? Dare to struggle, dare to win, and then we. What's the Latin catchphrase?
And then all power to the people.
All power to the people. That's it. So what we do, Alex. Yeah, we raise our fist, and like what happens, you repeat after me. So I go. So I'll say dare to struggle, and you say dare to struggle, dare to win, all power to the people. So dare to struggle,
dare to struggle,
dare to win,
dare to win,
all power to the people.
All power to the people.
Viva la revolution!
All right, thank you, comrades.
Thank you.